Well, thank you very much for having me, everyone. I have to say, I'm obviously going to have to do more due diligence when I accept speaking requests, because who wants to follow blockchain? I mean, that's a tall order. Self-driving cars, DNA sequencing for free, and everything else. So today's topic, what I'm going to speak to, is a little bit more grounded in Alberta, and in some of the resources and the opportunities that we have in our province. And so I'm going to give you just a quick overview of the mandate and our process and what that involved, but I really do want to focus on the conclusions that we drew after over a year of work in examining this issue. So I'm just also going to put my notes the right side up. It's usually helpful. There we go. Mandate. So you can find this online, so I won't belabor it. But we were a creation of the Royalty Review Committee. And in that royalty review panel, obviously they were looking at the upstream dynamics and the investment environment for the upstream industry. But they also took the time to say, listen, the province needs to be looking at how do we position the industry for long-term success, and how do we build on initiatives like the PDP program, or the Petrochemicals Diversification Program, that had been quite a success. And so the government asked myself and my colleagues on the committee to come together and provide them advice on how to make the province more diversified and resilient within the energy economy, how to move the energy industry up the value chain and diversify both the products that we're making and the markets that we're accessing. And I should say I was joined on that committee by some really dedicated folks from across a variety of walks of life within Alberta. And I think that the diversity at that table really contributed to the strength of the work that came out of the process. So over the course of from October 2016 to when we delivered our report in the fall of 2017, we engaged in quite a number of incredibly constructive discussions with folks like yourselves. So we engaged with economic development organizations, with industry, and with other stakeholders, really to understand what you were seeing in the state of the industry, what the outlook would be, where we had opportunities, and the policy tools that people felt were more effective. And I think that it's important when you look at the report. It's enormous. I fully accept this is something like 130 pages, and from the very beginning we took quite a holistic view of the investment environment, and that gave us, I think, different insights and different answers than if we had begun and ended our analysis at the facility gate. Right, so I think that the approach we took, was different from that perspective. We weren't looking at just the competitiveness of an ethane cracker. We were looking at the competitiveness of the investment environment within which these downstream decisions were going to be made. And so we asked, where do we have strengths? And that was a pretty obvious answer. So where are the strengths? But where are the opportunities, right? So one of the things that we wanted to look at is, shifting our mindset, really, across within the government, within, at the table, shifting the mindset from just a supply push to a market pull kind of mindset. Where are the markets for the resources that Alberta makes? And what can we do to access them? So if we look at the strengths and the opportunities that those create, why would the market not deliver those outcomes on its own? And that was, a really important question to us. If this is such a good idea, why isn't the market doing it? And so that was, kind of at the center of a lot of our debate and our discussion. And so then, looking at what are the pain points in the system? What are the constraints that are hampering these outcomes that are so obvious? And what is the role of government to address those constraints? Where can government partner effectively with industry and with communities and with other stakeholders in order to change the outcome? So I think it's important, to remember the context within which our committee was struck. I think, it's been a little while. I distinctly recall standing in the GE cafeteria, or kind of like kitchen space, watching the oil price fall. And watching we had BNN on all the time, and just watching it happen. And that feeling, it's a visceral, like you feel it in your body as you watch kind of what's happening, and how it didn't change, it just got worse, right? And so, when we were struck in October 2016, that had been going on for a while, and the pain was so real. And it was a moment of crisis, really. But I think that the industry, it's been a couple of years now, the industry has responded really quite impressively. But I don't think we can lose that, remembering the impact that had on our economy and on the people and the families of Alberta. And what was happening, though, was reflecting this transformation. It was reflecting quite a lot of dynamics in the global energy system. And when we looked at, when we sat down at the table and we said, okay, so, are we just the latest response to a commodity crash, right? Or how do we take, in the midst of this moment of crisis, how do we take a long-term view? And so when we spoke to Albertans about the opportunities, about the state of the markets and the state and the outlooks, really, this was consistent. The global energy system is under transformation. That's not changing, right? The transformation is taking place, and what we are seeing is that the intersection of all of these changes of technology, of markets, of policy, it's disrupting how much energy we need to produce, where we are producing it, and what kind of energy is being produced and consumed. So our demand sources are just in flux. And at the same time, our supply sources, our biggest, you've heard this a million times, our biggest customer has become our biggest competitor. We cannot ignore that, and that is not going to change. So, this profound impact has kind of stayed with the committee from the very beginning. And that's, when we looked at, well, where is there opportunity for Alberta? The biggest answer that we saw was around petrochemicals. Petrochemicals and partial upgrading on the oil side of things. And I think that, as much as we've gone through this volatility that Alberta has seen before, but still volatility that really has impacted us, the fact is that the opportunity around petrochemicals existed before, and it will exist in the future. This has always been a smart bet, and I think that that long-term strategic nature of the petrochemical space was what really captured our attention. So, I do want to just quickly give you a nutshell synopsis of what Downstream really is, because I know as much as, I think most people in this room are Albertans and therefore live and breathe fossil fuels, particularly from a combustion standpoint. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what petrochemicals are, where they come from, and before diving into why we want them. So just looking at that on the left here, let's just keep in mind that natural gas, so primarily the petrochemical space in North America is going to be a natural gas storyline. Can be an oil storyline, but from a competitiveness standpoint, it's natural gas. 92% of natural gas is that first component of methane, right? Petrochemicals are made from these next elements: ethane, propane, butane, condensates. And so those are the primary feedstocks for petrochemical manufacturing, and it is a manufacturing process. So just wanted to kind of level set there, make sure we're all on the same page of where this product is coming from. So, but just going back, so 92% is methane, 8% are the natural gas liquids, and that 8% is the most valuable, those are the valuable components that can be made into petrochemicals. Wrong button. There we go. And so those phones that you're looking at right now, tweeting about this amazing conference, those are petrochemical products. They have petrochemical components in them. And really, it's ubiquitous, right? Petrochemical products are everywhere in our life. And there's a couple here that I think are worth pointing out. Solar panels, wind turbines, right? This is a cycle. These are not, it's not always an either or, it's an and, right? You need to have these oil and gas inputs to create other sources of energy generation. So what are the observations that we came to? Well, the first is really that this is a virtuous cycle. This isn't about making a choice between the, say, turning away from the upstream in order to focus on the downstream. This was really about the complementarity of downstream bolstering the strength of our upstream. There's been some discussion of getting off oil and gas, and that's not what we were about, right? And the committee embraced that from the very beginning. This was about what more can we do with our product. This wasn't about turning away from that product. It's an incredible resource. Alberta is incredibly blessed to have it, and we wanted to see what more can we do to bolster the families in Alberta that depend on the industry for their livelihood, and across Canada for that matter. So we saw it as kind of further supporting the entire industry, the industry as a whole, bringing that to Alberta. The second thing, though, is that it's no secret. Petrochemicals, the fact that there's growth markets for petrochemicals is not, hidden data that no one knows about. China and India, the growth in Asia is well known, and other North American jurisdictions have beat us to the punch, right? Texas and Louisiana have been incredibly aggressive and smart in how they've been going after these investments. So, quite honestly, we're late. The next, though, is 70% of the input costs of a petrochemical facility are your feedstock. So we have quite an important advantage with that because we're close to the feedstock and we have plentiful, cheap feedstock. But we struggle with some of these other aspects, right? Capital cost competitiveness was clear. Inefficient regulatory processes for the downstream industry, and infrastructure bottlenecks. And I think in all of those areas, there's a space to play for government. We saw that there's large amounts of feedstock currently leaving the province, and it's being upgraded elsewhere. It's not that it's being burned elsewhere. It's being upgraded. Other producers, other players are able to take advantage of that and upgrade it elsewhere. And we also saw that if we want to continue to develop the resource that we have in bitumen, that we need to have new bitumen products in order and access new end consumers or new end refining customers. So we made 36 recommendations, and this is where you go, holy crap, she's really going to go through them all. And it is a 130-page report in 15, 20 minutes. Good luck. So I did a favor. You guys can all grab coffee after this next slide because I did some Coles notes. So this is really, if you want to think about how was the committee thinking about this entire strategy that we were setting out, the roadmap we were setting out, it really was, first of all, we got to get in this game. And if we're going to get in the game, we better play to win. Let's get out of our own way, get creative, and think long term. And that's really what all of those recommendations, they fall under one of those buckets. So the first, the vision, right? And we were pretty blunt about this in the report, right? We said, this report sets out a roadmap. We create a vision. If you have a vision, you need to have a strategy. You have a strategy, you need to have a plan. Then you need to execute, right? So now we're at execute time. But the first was commit. Be explicit. Be intentional. Say that you want to do this. And so that's why recommendation number 1, adopt this vision of transforming Alberta. Be ambitious. Transform Alberta into the premier jurisdiction for downstream oil and gas investment in North America. And I think that, as a committee, maybe it's just the makeup of who we were, but I think it was also informed by the stakeholders that we were engaged with. There's ambition in this province, and I think it's a beautiful thing, right? Like, we want to win. So that's where that vision came from. The next was, if you're going to be in the game, you better play to win. And just, Alberta needs to do better and can do better than winning a miscongeniality award. That's not going to get us any downstream dollars. So we have to recognize the competition in this space, and we have to give our organizations the tools, the mandate, the structure, and the tools to play to win. And that's where, I think the government had taken some good steps already. They had created economic development and trade already. They had created kind of a nascent Invest Alberta. Quite honestly, the committee said, good work, put it on steroids, right? Give those organizations what they need to be successful. And so with that, what did we think? We thought that they needed to give, first of all, strengthen Invest Alberta, and there's quite a lot in there around specificity of what they need. Create the fiscal toolbox that gives them the flexibility and the authority to negotiate and strike deals for strategic investments, right? First of all, how is the province identifying strategic investments? What is strategic for Alberta, for the province? And then how is it hunting for those investments rather than just receiving, inquiries? So really changing the orientation of Invest Alberta, and then providing that organization with the means to go out and do that. The next regulatory framework, that one was getting out of our own way. I think Alberta has a very sophisticated upstream regulatory framework. If you look at what they can do, it's predictable, it's consistent, they're measured, they report, it's transparent, they report on their timelines if you're looking at wells. But we don't authorize thousands of downstream developments every year. And so as a province, the same level of consistency and predictability does not exist when it comes to the downstream. They don't share similar experiences. And so, quite honestly, the first thing we said was, you need to harmonize, you need to have the same level of rigor, of consistency for a downstream investor as you do for an upstream investor. You need to think about regulatory timeframes as a competitive advantage. You need to be sure that you're competitive in that space with other jurisdictions. And we specifically called out Texas and Louisiana. And you can do this. There's ways of doing this that are not about lowering standards, right? Like, this is not undoable. This is not, a puzzle that we can't solve. It can be solved. It can be solved with resources. The next was, let's be a little bit creative around this. We know, we looked at outcomes, right? So when you look at the pre-approval recommendation, we said, can we look at an area that is ripe for development and say, we're going to have a process that approves outcomes, environmental outcomes. So we don't know what kind of facility that NOx or SOx or GHGs or water use will come from. But we can know as a community what our tolerance levels and what the region's watershed, airshed, et cetera, can tolerate. And we can go in and have that process done, because what does that do? First of all, it provides certainty to everyone in the space, in the community, about what kind of development is going to take place in their community and what kind of outcomes can be expected. And it also removes an enormous amount of risk for an investor. Right? So it's one of these, let's get creative about how we're doing regulations while maintaining, the standards that we have in this province that everyone supports. There is another one here. I'm looking at time, I probably don't have time to talk about it, but it's component-based policy, and that's really kind of goes back to that point around we ship about the equivalent of a world-scale ethane cracker's feedstock needs. We ship that out every year on the Alliance pipeline. It's an estimate, though, because we actually there's no reporting required to government in terms of what the content of the natural gas stream is. So it's very difficult to make policy if you have no content reporting. So we just said, listen, you need to look at what are we doing with the components. If you want to develop all of this downstream, you need to ensure that you at least know what's happening with the components. Infrastructure. The infrastructure point really is about clusters, recognizing that there's an opportunity cost to being transactional, right? The opportunity cost is constrained future growth. If you have a web of pipes and wires that is suboptimally allocated, right? If you don't have optimal allocation and where you can share the resources in terms of water, electricity, other utility needs, then you're going to run into barriers to future growth. Innovation, let's get creative. There was the first, the clear immediate concern on innovation was partial upgrading. And I think that partial upgrading is a bit of a misnomer. I hate the term. I told everyone that. But partial upgrading, I think what it really is doing is it's creating different kinds of crude, right? Different kinds of crude access different refineries and they access different markets, right? So I think that it really changes the dynamic. And as a committee, we were working within the constraints of our existing pipeline infrastructure and our existing dynamics on getting crude to market, right? So we thought, like, how can we get more products to more markets with our existing infrastructure? Partial upgrading was the way that we saw to do that because it can increase pipeline capacity. Similarly, on the get creative, let's get creative about who we're involving and how, the business models and the stakeholders that we're engaging with these opportunities. And then thinking long term. I think that governments come and go, programs come and go. Alberta's resources, Alberta's communities, Alberta's skills and advantages are here to stay, right? So we wanted to shift this from a program-based approach to really a commitment on the part of the province to be in this for the long haul and to set up a structure so that they could commit to this over the longer term. And that's where the idea of a diversification fund really came. Let's return to that practice of setting aside some of the non-renewable resource revenue and invest it back into building markets for the energy industry. So I think that's the conclusion of our main recommendations. And I think when we start on one of these things, you never really know what's going to happen, right? So we all sat around the table on our very first day and we said, what does success look like and what does failure look like? And I think we were all agreed that we didn't want to commit a year of our lives to a report that would sit on a shelf. And we know that there have been many good quality reports that have sat on shelves. And so it was really heartening to see the action that the government took immediately. So Bill 1 in the throne speech was a commitment to supporting partial upgrading, a further commitment on petrochemicals, as well as on straddle plants, on the infrastructure needed to extract the natural gas liquids. And I think that was a really important piece of this puzzle. So with that, I will close. And I don't know if there's any time for questions, but... Okay, yeah.